Hello everyone, Antonio here with Mangrove Realty out of Sarasota and Siesta Key, and today we're going to be covering flood zones. If you've been searching for property here in Florida, you've probably learned a new term in your vocabulary, and that's flood zone, and you're probably wondering why they're so important here in Florida. In this video, I hope to give you a great explanation. Not just that, I don't plan to go into super crazy detail because I think that's just going to confuse you. I'm going to summarize it, and I think it's going to be the best way for you to understand them. It's going to make it hopefully less confusing and give you a better idea on flood zones. Here in Florida, I can't speak for all of Florida. I can certainly speak here from where I live, from about Tampa all the way down to Fort Myers, and obviously here Sarasota. But there's no such thing as a non-flood zone area. You're probably saying, wait, what? What does that mean? So everywhere I buy is going to flood? Well, Flood Zone X, you're going to learn a little bit more about this here when I get into detail, but Flood Zone X is the lowest possible risk that is designated to properties. And that's, again, Flood Zone X. It's the one that if you have a mortgage on the property, you plan to have a mortgage, the bank is not going to require you to have a flood policy. It's the one that everybody ideally wants. It's Flood Zone X. But even Flood Zone X, in the name itself, is still a flood zone. Flood Zone X, right? So even flood zone X, which is the lowest possibility, is still considered a flood zone based on the FEMA website. And by definition, when you research flood zone X has, I think, only one chance of flooding in 100 years. So it is the lowest risk possible, but it still has a risk of flooding. Here in Sarasota, we just got over a couple big hurricanes, and there was quite a few areas here within Sarasota that were a flood zone X that I talked to people that have been around, 60, 70 years, and they had never seen flooding. And guess what happened? They flooded. Hopefully that was our 1 in 100 year, and we won't see another one for 100 years. But a lot of these properties were in flood zone X, and they still flooded. So that's the first thing I want everybody to understand is if you're looking to buy, at least in this area of Florida, there's no such thing as a non-flood zone area. Pretty much everywhere around here is a flood zone. X is the lowest possible designation you can get. It's ideally the one you want to get, but even X is still considered a flood zone. Like I said, I didn't even know that before this video. Generally, I would interpret flood zone X as a no flood zone, but as I learned, it still is a flood zone. So the designations we're going to talk about today, without going into super detail, is going to be X or non-X. Anything that's non-X, you're going to have to carry a flood policy if you have a mortgage. If it's X, you will not have to carry a flood policy. So to keep it super simple, without going into too much detail, I think there's 10 or 15 different designations. All you got to worry about, if you can have it your way, the ideal home, you only want to look at flood X. Now you may be saying, well, who would go for a higher flood risk property, right? Who willingly would go something that's non-X? And that's going to be, if you're somebody that's watching this video and you want to be on the water, you want to be on a canal, you want to be in the bay side of Sarasota, you want to be, on a beach or whatever, you're really going to have no choice. You're going to be in a higher risk flood zone, and you're 100% going to have to carry a flood zone policy if you do have a mortgage. I mean, honestly, even if you didn't have a mortgage, unless you have the money to replenish everything, because when a home floods, you're not just losing the furniture. You're losing kitchen cabinets, you're losing drywall. Up till about 4 feet of drywall is going to completely have to get removed. It's going to be a mess, and it's not going to be pretty. So even if you don't have a mortgage, if you have a ton of money, maybe you're okay with, redoing it yourself, fine. But even if you don't have a mortgage, I would still probably urge you to get a flood policy on it to protect you. Because like I said, we are in Florida. We do get hurricanes on a yearly basis. It's not something, I haven't lived in other states, but like earthquake, tornadoes and such, not everybody in those states gets them all the time. So you can probably get away with, not having those type of policies. But here in Florida, if you're somewhere that's in a high risk and you maybe paid cash for the home and you don't want to have a flood policy, well, you can do that, but it's probably not recommended. So you're maybe watching this video and saying, well, let's say I do have a home that I really, really like, and it happens to be in a non-X flood zone, which means I'm going to have to carry flood insurance. why is it such a big deal? I just get a flood insurance for it. Well, it's going to become a big deal when you see the cost of it. I'm obviously not an insurance agent. I don't do insurance, so I can't speak on the exact price. Not only that, but just like every car is different, every home's going to be different depending on where it sits, the exact flood zone classification. It's going to vary tremendously on the cost. But I will tell you this, if you get two homes side by side, one with a policy, one without a flood policy, the one with the policy is going to be substantially more than the one without the policy. And any day of the week, I guarantee you're going to go with the one that does not have to have a flood policy. Even if you do get a property that's in a flood X zone and the bank does not require you to have a policy for flood zone, you can still get a flood policy. And contrary to what I just said, you may be thinking, well, if I get a policy, won't it be super expensive? And the answer is no. If you purchase a home that's not in a high risk flood zone, which would be designation X, you can still get a policy, flood zone policy, and you're not going to be paying anywhere near as to what somebody would be paying that is in a non-X flood zone. So I just want to put that out. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, how do I know what designation it is, or if it is X or not X? Well, the easiest way to know is with the agent you're working with. People that work with me, I'm able to set filters to only send them, properties that are flood X zone. Maybe you're saying, well, how can I do my own research? I don't want to reach out to anybody, or I don't want to bug anybody, or, whatever. You're able to go on the FEMA website. That's the website you're seeing here. And you're able to plug in any address you want. And it's going to show you not only what the designation of that property is, but you're going to be able to see how far away a non-flood zone is. It's going to show you outline that show you where the X's are and where the non-X's are. And that's, while we're on this topic, I also want to talk about something else. So here where I live, across the street from where I live, the homes are on the water, right? They're on the canal. Where I live, none of the homes are on the water. So the homes across the street from me are in a non-X flood zone. And believe it or not, even the street itself is in a non-X flood zone. So the street has a high probability of flooding, as well as obviously the property. On top of that, that designation, the non-X designation, comes up to my lawn. Not a lot, maybe like 5 feet. So you may be saying, well, if the non-X touches my property at all, do I still have to carry a flood policy? That's difficult to answer, and it's really going to depend on the bank and the insurance. So you're going to have to send that to the insurance broker. They're going to be able to tell you this is or isn't going to require it. In my scenario, it did not require it. So only because the property has some of it that's non-X does not mean you're going to have a flood policy. I will tell you this. If any portion of the building itself, the concrete slab itself, does make contact with a non-X flood zone, you probably will have to carry a flood policy. But if it only comes up to the lawn, even halfway to the lawn, generally speaking, you won't have to carry a flood policy. But like I said, scenarios like that, don't rule them out. Send them to the insurance agent. Maybe talk to a real estate agent, and he'll be able to shed some light on that. Another thing I want to talk about, there's a lot of communities, especially HOA communities, that have retention ponds. So retention ponds are man-made ponds that are used to capture water from runoff to then irrigate the water, like the lawns, the garden, and so on. So only because the property has a retention pond right behind it does not mean it's in a high-risk flood zone. Believe it or not, there's properties that sit on a retention pond that are still classified as designation X, which is the lowest one, which is the one that you won't have to carry a policy. And the same can be said, turning that around. There's properties that you can go to that are super far away from any body of water, but are still in a high risk flood zone. Now, this is why it's very important that you understand it's either X or non-X. In a perfect world, if you could have it the way, you wanted it, you only want to look at flood X zone properties. It's the one that's going to be obviously the most affordable and the least risk of flooding. So that's going to be it for today's video. Hopefully you guys learned something new. Hopefully I kept it really simple. Like I said, I didn't want to confuse you guys with all the different 15 designations that are on the FEMA website. I probably wouldn't get into crazy detail on those. I mean, if you want to, you're more than welcome to do your research on them. But really, if you're getting financing, the bank is only going to care about if it has an X label. If it doesn't have an X label, they're going to force you to have a flood policy. If it has an X label, they're not going to force you to have a flood policy. You can still get a flood policy if it's X, and it's not going to cost anywhere near what it would cost somebody that's in a higher risk. So that's going to be it, guys. Obviously, if you have any questions, be sure to post them down below. I do check the comments, so I can totally answer them. Maybe you have a topic for a different video I can do in the future on something else that maybe is confusing you. Post it down below. I'd be more than happy to check it out and possibly do a video on that in the future. My contact information is down below. That's actually my direct cell phone number. You can call me, text me. I'd be more than happy to talk about this in a lot more detail to make sure you're not confused and you have a clear understanding of flood zones here in Florida. So that's going to be it. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you guys did like this video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. Maybe you could share it with somebody else that's considering moving here in Florida, or maybe just doesn't have a good understanding of flood zones. I would also appreciate that. If I earned your subscription, I have a ton more videos planned here in the coming future that are going to cover a ton of Q&As. Also, little secret, I'm going to be covering most affordable places to live in Sarasota as well as near Sarasota. So stay tuned for that. Thank you guys very much. As always, till next time.